We're so happy to be back with you today. We are so excited. We have an amazing guest that we brought back today, Elisa Abernathy, and we're going to get into a very critical topic, which is psychological abuse. We want you to tune into the conversation. If you're watching us from LinkedIn, throw it into the comment box and tell us where you're tuning in from Facebook Live or YouTube Live. We definitely want to acknowledge you. And I'm just going to take a moment to share this on my personal page. Throw it in. Give me a moment. And then also, if you are tuning in and watching, you can share this as well. So go ahead and share this message out. We definitely want to get the message out to as many people as possible. And then let us know who you are, where you're from. And then as we're in the conversation, if there are things that resonate with you, as always, we definitely want you to give us feedback throughout the chat and put it into the comment section. Chat with us. Make this engaging. So we want you to be a part of the discussion, even though you're watching. You're still a part of it. We made it through a whole nother week, y'all. It's Friday, and if you're excited about the weekend like I am, we're probably rejoicing that it is Friday and we've gotten through the week, and we get Monday off. So we have a long weekend. All right, let's get started. Let's get started. So, welcome everyone to our fireside chat. The month of October, as mentioned before, is solely dedicated to women issues. So, we're going to be dealing with issues pertaining to women. Not that these issues only happen and show up in women, but we know that it's more prevalent when dealing with when we're talking about women. But today, in particular, we are going to bring and loop in the effect of women issues on children, and this is going to be a very critical topic because, as we were talking about it before we went live, this is something that we tend to sort of tread lightly and not talk more about. But it's very important that we lift these things up, especially because it matters to our kids. And we're talking about youth mental health. We have to understand what are the causes that are shaping or influencing or impacting their mental health. And one of those things is actually psychological abuse. So we're going to be dealing with that topic today, and specifically how psychological abuse within partners, when that's happening in the home, how that impacts the well-being of children. And so sometimes we're only thinking about physical abuse and the impact of that on children, but there are times that psychological abuse is going on, and when it does happen, there are serious critical consequences that we have to lift up. So we have a professional and expert with us, Elisa Abernathy. We're so excited to have you back. Welcome back, Elisa.
Thank you so much for having me back on your platform. I'm excited to be here with all of you. And I'm also, it's my pleasure to talk about such a vital topic and subject matter.
Absolutely. And Elisa, we definitely appreciate you, and we're excited about all the information you're going to share. So can you, for those that are watching and they may be having questions about what is psychological abuse, may not have heard the term before, or maybe a little on the cusp of not understanding it, can you tell us more about what is psychological abuse in your own words?
Well, so just to make it extremely simple, psychological abuse is emotional abuse. So more people have heard the term emotional abuse than psychological. Psychological abuse is more of a clinical term. And so it's characterized by a series of behaviors where one person is exposing another person to behavior that can be harmful and mostly verbal, right? Where they're using demeaning terminology, where they're keeping them from their family, where they're keeping them isolated, where they're blaming them for everything. So it's really mostly everyone, I would say, listening and has heard of the term emotional abuse. So that is what psychological abuse is.
Thank you for making that very plain and clear, because I think that when we think about the definition in a way that you have explained it, it happens more times than we acknowledge. I
Mhm.
can think of many times that couples or parents have used these techniques on one another, whether it's manipulating the other parent or blaming or putting them down or cursing them out. And a lot of times it happens in front of children.
Yeah.
Can you, in your experience and your expertise, I know that this is something you deal with, you've been dealing with for a number of years. Can you speak more about what the impact of that is? Or what does it look like first for parents to use psychological abuse or for it to show up in the home? And then, secondly, as a follow up, what are the implications of that on children?
So, just to give a little clarity of my background, just in case anyone didn't hear from the last time that I came on, I work within the shelter system. I work with children and families. I'm currently a social service supervisor within a shelter. And so we deal with a lot of children, a lot of parents, whether it's a single household or two-parent household. And so what that looks like for a child, just to give you a generalized example, you hear about a child who goes to school and they are constantly bullying other children. They're constantly calling other children out of their name. They're teasing other children. They're making other children feel uncomfortable about whatever it is about them. So, how does that translate from a child witnessing psychological abuse? So a child is witnessing mom and dad having a disagreement, and dad keeps blaming mom for everything. Or he keeps saying to mom, "You're not smart. You're not intelligent. You don't pay," just saying a lot of demeaning things. So now the child is going into the school and reversing the behavior. Of course, the school is going to define it as, or the professionals are going to define it as bullying another child. Whereas that child is living inside of a space and an environment where they are witnessing psychological abuse, or lack of better terms, emotional abuse on a daily. So when they go to school, they are now perpetuating this behavior, but it's showing up and being presented in a different way by the child.
So, and that's really important. That's an important point you raised. So, what I'm hearing you say is one of the implications of psychological abuse when it's being used in the home is that it will show up in children's behavior, and a
Mm,
lot of times it may show up in school because school
yeah,
is where kids are typically in most of their day. They're in school, and so when teachers are interpreting this behavior, they may interpret it as aggressive or bullying,
mm,
but they may not know that behind that bullying or behind that aggression, there is some abuse going on in the home or between the parents that that child has seen, internalized it, and now is projecting within their immediate school environment.
yes, yes. And if you look more into children who are living in households and environments that are generally exposed to domestic violence, they do display different behaviors. Some children become violent. Some children, they deal with PTSD, they deal with depression. So the implications of children in homes that are experiencing DV, I think, is a very vital conversation, one that I feel like every year when we're having these conversations about domestic violence, we need to also make sure that we're focusing on the impacts that it's having on the children. Because ultimately, these are children that have to become adults, that have to grow into the world, right? And so while we're cultivating them and they're being shaped as children, we have to understand that these environments that they're living in is shaping their behavior. It's called the person and environment, right? And so they're in these environments and they're being shaped, and their behavior is being shaped, and they're being impacted severely. emotionally and mentally and developmentally, because that's another thing, right? We see that there's a lot of children that are getting diagnosed and they're receiving IEPs, and they're having all of these different things diagnosed, not realizing that the whatever is happening in that environment is the determining factor as to why we may see even some challenges in their developmental growth.
That's, I mean, these are really important things that you're highlighting, the ways in which it's showing up in inside of in children, but also within the environment. And I think that's a crucial piece that we tend to miss. And we're, we're both social workers. We understand the impact of environments on children, whether it's home environment, community environment, or school
Yeah.
environments. But environments do impact children behavior. And a lot of times we're not looking at ways in which the environment that they're in is influencing what we're seeing. And so you highlighted a lot of important things. And I think that piece is, again, it's missing when we're evaluating children within the school. We're looking whether they're going through an IEP evaluation, which for those that don't know what that stands for, individualized education plan. If they're being evaluated for that to see what's going on, a lot of times kids are also misdiagnosed. That's a whole nother topic there.
Yes.
But sometimes they're mislabeled, they're misdiagnosed, and they're the parents are they get those daunting calls. um you know a lot of times and for them either to pick up their child or something happened with their child again,
Yeah.
and they're not, people are workers in school, are social workers, or teachers, whoever they are. We need to be aware of these signs and be equipped to handle them, and so that when they show up, we're not labeling children as problems and labeling them as
Yeah.
aggressive or angry when there are other deeper things going on. But I
Yeah.
wanted to back up a little bit because for those that are watching that may not still understand quite what it means or what it looks like for psychological abuse to show up. Can you give some concrete, maybe two examples of what psychological abuse is or looks like specifically within a home between two parents that may not either be married or maybe separated, um, or maybe together? Because I think that those are two different things, but it's still exposure. So if kids are being exposed, whether they're being exposed directly in the home while their parents are in the home together, or if they're being exposed when the parents are separated but they're still seeing the psychological abuse or witnessing it. Can you give some two clear examples of what that looks like for those that are watching?
So one example would be constantly criticizing, right? So constantly criticizing, let's say, their parenting style. If one parent has a preference on how they would like the child to, let's say, their bedtime, or how that they're a parent, and another parent doesn't agree, and so because they don't have the ability to communicate effectively and in a healthy manner their lack of agreement, they're saying mean things to them, whether it's talking to them out of their name, but just criticizing their ability to be able to make a decision about whatever it is for that child. But also being able to understand that even if we're two parents, we may not always agree on everything, but being able to find a common ground. So one of the things that are, which I think to some people they may say, oh, that's normal. Most parents, they have moments where they don't agree with the parenting style or the decision making. However, it can turn into a situation where if every single conversation that parent is having with the other parent, and there's always a negative critique, and there's never okay, well, I understand, but a suggestion as opposed to a penalizing or telling them that they aren't a good parent. Another direct sign of psychological abuse, I want to say, is demeaning. That kind of sounds like, well, another one that's more threatening. I'll use a different one because that one sounds the same. I'm threatening you to harm you or your children. That's very, very direct, right? Um, that person threatening to hit or physically and threaten them and to do harm to them directly. I would say that, and even pets, right? A lot of people don't think that that's a sign of psychological abuse, but as me and Shaniqua knows that one of the signs in diagnosing and people with certain
Mhm.
diagnoses is harm to animals, right?
Yes,
So
correct.
that can also be a sign of psychological abuse as well.
Those are, I mean, I'm so glad that you said that because a lot of times the two examples you gave, it becomes normalized for a lot of people. They've lived in this dysfunction, and a lot of it is cultural. And I think this is just the way it's supposed to be.
Right,
And in certain Black communities, we call it baby mama and baby daddy drama. But in
right,
reality, but in that baby mama, baby daddy drama, there's some psychological abuse that's going on that we
yes,
have not necessarily raised, we haven't understood or recognized that this is what it is. We haven't named it, but we're naming it today. It is psychological abuse. So Elisa gave some very clear examples. If that is your situation, or if you know parents that are in that situation or going through that, then that is what, it most likely we don't want to diagnose it without knowing. But
yes,
if there are clear signs showing that, that may be signs that that person or that parent is in a psychologically abusive relationship. Now, I also think it's important to mention that you don't have to be, two parents don't have to be married or together to psychologically abuse each other. So even if the parent is not in the home and two parents are trying to co-parent, if they're not co-parenting effectively and the other parent is using those techniques of threatening, humiliating, or putting down, especially in front of the child, it is still a form of psychological abuse, even if they're not in a romantic relationship any longer. So that's important to also mention because I think sometimes the excuse that we may hear is that, well, I'm not in a relationship with this person, so it's not, so I can talk to them down, or I can
right,
manipulate them, or I can threaten them, or I can do these things, but it is still abusive psychologically. It is detrimental to not only that other parent or person, but also to the child. And I think
yes,
that's important to also highlight.
yes, yes, yes. And it's not easy, and just talking about domestic violence and us being able to create safe spaces to be able to be transparent about moments where we are in situations where we feel like we are being abused verbally, and where we're being abused verbally and emotionally, and not really knowing what it looks like and what it sounds like. But anytime somebody continues to say anything to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, uneasy, or even insecure, finding a space, finding a person, finding a situation that you put yourself in to begin to unpack what you are feeling during these spaces, and also creating these spaces for youth and for children. Because again, there's a lot of young people, there's a lot of youth, and there's a lot of children that don't necessarily feel like they're in a space where they can communicate because they're so used to dysfunction and arguing. Transparent moment, I'm a mom of a, well, young adult now. He's 23 years old. And I've always made it my uh, mission to create a space where he could communicate to me and say, well, mom, I felt uncomfortable. So just creating spaces, finding spaces for yourself as an adult, but also creating spaces for your children to be able to do that. But first, we want you to deal with what you need to deal with you. Because it's going to be kind of hard to create a safe space for your child and create that conversational piece if you are still unpacking and processing what you're even experiencing, and you are trying to understand, am I being abused? Because you might be asked, somebody might be watching and asking themselves that question now. Am I being abused psychologically? And just to kind of expand this, Shaniqua, sometimes we're in professional spaces, sometimes we're in different spaces in our lives where we may be experiencing emotional abuse and we just don't know how to define it or what words to put to it. But in any event, if you are in a space where you feel uncomfortable and you need a support, I, would say find your tribe, find your support, look for a therapist, create a safe space or find a safe space for you to be able to unpack whatever it is you're feeling to get clarity about it.
Yeah, I think that's so real, and some people may be watching now or later and maybe asking, am I that person? Am I in an abusive relationship? Based on what are some of the signs that we mentioned, it's important to evaluate that because there are real consequences to yourself, to even the abuser, right?
Yes,
Because even abusers themselves, most abusers were abused at some point and then became perpetrators who were once
yes,
victims. And so I think that's the cycle, that's the vicious cycle of abuse. At
yes,
when you are exposed to abuse, and this is why we have to stop it with our children, because when
yes.
they're exposed to it, then we're exposing them to grow up to be abusers if we don't stop it and get them the help that they need as children
I'm
before they
so
even
glad.
know what a relationship is.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that because I don't want to get into pop culture. I don't want to get into the trends and things that are happening on social media right now. But a lot of people don't understand why when they are showing documentaries and they're showing the history of different people who have criminal backgrounds, why they always go into the childhood. And they always go back to the childhood because there were always some signs and implications that this would be something that would affect them later on in adulthood. So, the reason why we're focusing so heavily this conversation on youth and children is because we are working towards and we're partnering. We want to partner with you with cultivating healthy, whole children that are going to do great things in the future. But the reason why, dealing with it during childhood is important. But some of the symptoms, I think I did touch on this earlier, of psychological abuse, besides PTSD and depression, and the women who are experiencing psychological abuse are more likely to have more mental and physical health challenges, right?
Mm.
They are more likely to be in the hospital and have poor health. So, knowing whether or not you are dealing with psychological abuse and how you are processing, because how you process it mentally will show up physically. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself, mind, body, heart, and soul, all of those things come together.
Thank you. That's really important. And there are so many studies out there that show the connection and the correlation between your physiological well being and your psychological well being. The two are very much so integrated, and we don't realize it. This is why a lot of women end up having issues and sicknesses and may not realize that a lot of it had derived from very unhealthy, toxic, abusive relationships. So it's really important that we are healthy, and health is not just physical, but it's mental health as well. And of course, we're digging a little deeper into how this is impacting our kids, because our kids are the most vulnerable to
Yeah.
domestic violence. When they're exposed to it, there are some very critical consequences. I actually want to share a quick story of a client that well, it wasn't my direct client, but it was one of my social workers that I was supervising, worked with a little boy. And when he actually came in not through the traditional referral process, he came in through our after school program.
Mm,
And so when I was listening to the complaints of the teachers, I said, there's some serious, I immediately, just being a clinician, I said, he's gone through DV and domestic violence and separation and trauma. The first
mm,
time I heard that there were some clear signs, and I'll share one of them now, is if there's a child that has issues with transitions. I mean, just like can't transition from one place to another, and whether from home to the store or from home to school. I'm talking about really horrible time transitioning or just not able to smoothly transition without really um, magnifying tantrums, that may be a sign of trauma. So kids that have experienced some level of trauma, they tend to have issues with transition. So if you notice that a kid is just having a difficult time, and it might be something very small, like, okay, Johnny, we're going to transition from the classroom to the gym, and they're falling out and they're screaming, and I mean, and it's consistent across environment. So not just one environment, but it's consistent. You see in a consistent pattern that wherever they go, it was time to transition is difficult. That may be a clear sign of trauma. And so back to the story of this young child, this was one of the symptoms. He would yell and scream when it was time to just go through any transition, whether it's okay, we're going to go into a new activity. He just was not having it. And then when it was time for his mom to pick him up, he would yell so much from the sixth floor, you could hear him downstairs on the first floor, and he was tiny little thing. And so I said he needs to be evaluated. So we brought him in into the counseling program to be evaluated. And when we met with mom, of course, this is when we got the information. And what was happening was the mother just escaped a really horrible domestic violence situation where she actually her partner or ex-partner had almost killed her in front
Mm,
of her son, and not once, not twice, but three times. And he was
wow.
there. She was actually held hostage at gunpoint. And so, of course, they labeled this boy as you're aggressive, you're this, you're that tiny little, cutest little child. But because, of course, they did not know or did not take the time to evaluate what was going on in the home. They were not able to really name what was going on. And so he had experienced and witnessed not just physical abuse with his mom and dad, but also psychological abuse. And it showed
Mm,
up he was only 5 years old, I believe, and having a really difficult time, which is with being able to just to interact with his peers, and to just be in an environment where he can explore
yeah,
and just be out. He can do
right.
that. Everything around him was unsafe because of what the world had told him based on his lived experiences at such a young
Yeah,
age.
his environment, yeah, yeah.
So this
Wow.
is, very obviously it's just one child, but there are many other kids
Yes.
that have gone through very similar issues. And these are just some of the ways that psychological abuse can impact kids. But to our professionals and our social workers, or even our teachers that may be watching, what are some words of advice that you can give them in terms of some symptoms to look out for, and then some advice if there's noticing this in children?
I would say also too, the opposite of a child who is falling out of and crying is a child who's always in a corner, a child who's always isolated, a child who's not interactive, who isn't willingly participating, and they always be really quiet and really shy. They're not making eye contact. Those are things for you to look out too, to see that there may be something happening with them. They may actually be being abused as opposed to just being in a space of experiencing it. So I would say definitely look out for that child as well too. I would also say pay attention to their interactions with other children, how they are in the lunchroom. Are they eating? Are they asking for extra food? Because they may be experiencing hunger, and they don't know. Children, not a lot of children don't know how to verbalize what they're experiencing at home, and or they're scared to, because if the abuse is happening at home, they're probably afraid that if they tell the truth about what's happening to them, that they too are going to be harmed as well. So I would say those are some of the signs that they should look for outside of a child who is acting out outwardly. To also pay attention to the very quiet, very shy child.
Absolutely, and that is very important. That it may show up on the other extreme. Kids may be extremely withdrawn
Yes.
versus very expressive. They may be, in a corner or just socially isolated away from other kids. So those are some very, very clear signs. And as parents, we must also be aware of how that shows up. And also just if you are a parent and at some point your child may have been exposed to psychological abuse in the home, then my advice to you is to get help to evaluate them. If you notice that they were impacted by it, if you're seeing signs, even if they were not impacted, if they were exposed to it at some point or they're being exposed to it, then the advice is definitely to get them help. And counseling is an excellent form of help, and it works
Yes.
for children. And there are different interventions and techniques that are utilized that are very individualized to the child. And the great thing about it is parents can be included in those sessions as well. So my advice is to seek help. And if you need help seeking help, please reach out to us so we can help you.
Yeah.
Um, we're at the end, and I know, Lisa, you're at work and you have to go, but I just want to thank you. Any last words you want to share to those that are watching?
Yes, I was just gonna say, if you are within a school, you have access to a school, see your parent coordinator. Parent coordinators are very vital resources in your school. They can help link you to some services if you do have concerns about your child's behavior, or even if you are dealing with something and you need support, you can reach out to a parent coordinator. You could dial 311 for resources. You can even look into Dr. I'm calling you doctor already. Look, I'm speaking doctor over her life already. um, Speak with her organization. They have resources. There's so many resources, but definitely you could dial 311. You could Google. Just reach out to someone. There is someone, and there's a community for you who could provide the support that you need to get you the resources that you need.
Absolutely. And there's also a hotline within New York City, and that, thank you so much. That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline up there, 1-800-799-7233. If you are in need of help, or if you might just know someone that's in need of help and you just want to get information, you can also reach out to that hotline as well. They'll be able to support you, and that is national. So whatever state you're in, they will be able to help you. And then lastly, if you're in a New York City area, there's a New York City Well hotline as well. And through that hotline, you can actually speak to a counselor right away. So if you are in need of just support or resources and you just want to talk, there's trained counselors that are on the line that can talk to you right away. So you can reach out to New York City Well hotline as well. The number is there, 1-888-692-9355. And then last but not least, Life Equip Group Incorporated. We'll put the number up there on the screen as well. So there are resources out there to support you. Sometimes we don't know where to go, and that's why we don't get help. But we want to give you some numbers that you can actually contact. And if you need help contacting those numbers because you're a little afraid, you can talk to someone that you trust or that you care about, that cares about you, that will also keep your information confidential, and you probably can call together, or you can reach out to Life Equip Group or to iRaise, and we'll be happy to help you. We're at the end, but we want you to get this information. We're going to continue on our fireside chats. This month again is dedicated to women and women issues. So we'll be meeting again next week, Tuesday, October the 11th. We'll see you then. We wish all of you a happy long weekend. Hopefully practice some self-compassion and self-care, and spend time with loved ones and families, and do something that you love or you enjoy, because you deserve that. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Lisa. We appreciate you so much. And for all that you do with Life Equip Group and in the community. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, should I leave?